Hello fellers. I'm not sure how this video will be called, but I basically think Leviticus Cornwall would have worked better as a character if he was treated differently. I'll come back to this later, but firstly I want to point out what I don't like about him. Oh, and remember this video is strictly based on personal opinions, so you might disagree with everything I'll say. Please share your opinions below. Overall I think it's an alright character. He pretty much sums up the classic stereotype of the mid-19th century oilman. He's a villain who wouldn't have any scruples destroying everything in his path, as Dutch says. He's also one of the driving forces which led to the gang's downfall, considering he was the main financier for the Pinkerton agency regarding the capture of Van der Linde. The final confrontation between him and Dutch is a really cool and meaningful moment for Dutch's character development but also the game itself. It shows the hypocrisy of both of them, one who pretends to be a benefactor to the eyes of society, the other underlining a difference that isn't quite there. Both of them destroyed everything they came across. Dutch just didn't have that wide range of action. Probably Cornwall cared even less about people than Dutch, but the effects of their work were basically the same. The thing that bothers me the most is that Dutch still manages to smoke him without many consequences. To the utmost his death accelerated Pinkerton's investigations and made the gang even more infamous, but it was doomed even without all that noise. The fact he dies, however, is in contrast to what happens in the original game. Most of the worst and despicable people unfairly manage to be successful and outlive the game. Just think about Reyes. Wes Dickens, even if wasn't as wicked as the others, he still was a scammer and a piece of crap. And there's also Nate Johns, whom almost no one talks about, but he is important and we'll get back to him later. On the other hand, in Red Dead Redemption 2 every antagonist dies. The Greys and the Braithwaites, Bronte, Fusser, Milton, Cornwall, Colm, Micah, and in some way it's a problem. In the original game, it's said quite clearly that Dutch's wrongdoings didn't solve absolutely anything. Everything we do in the game, despite having major repercussions, still ultimately results in nothing. Mexico remains a dictatorship. John doesn't get his life back and isn't redeemed, at least officially. Civilization with all its flaws continues to prosper and spread despite what Van der Linde said. There is no happy ending in absolutely no way. In RDR2 this aspect is treated much more subtly and isn't always respected. For example, killing Bronte was ultimately just an egoistic and impulsive choice that didn't solve anything. Bronte was replaced with another scumbag and that's it. St. Denis remained controlled and corrupted by the mob. So, in some ways, this aspect is present, but it's not presented in the same raw and implacable way RDR1 used us to. Is this bad? Not necessarily, they are different games, but you would expect them to have a more similar atmosphere, especially because they regard the same story. It's not like GTA 4 and 5, which can be totally different because they focus on different views of America and different plots. So what does Cornwall have to do with this? I think at least him should have been spared. Not because he deserves that of course, but because of a narrative purpose and also because he was the most protected and difficult to kill. Killing a dictator on a remote island is one thing, killing a mafia boss who has connections all over the state is something else, but executing in plain sight a man that represents America itself, a man whose name appears all over the country, one of the richest men of the planet, is a suicide mission. At least this incredibly unrealistic decision is justified by Dutch's madness. But what if I tell you Dutch should have never been able to be around Cornwall? I mean, realistically he would have had bodyguards all around him. I know he probably felt untouchable, but come on. Dutch was getting more and more dangerous as the story progressed, even killing the powerful Bronte, and Cornwall knew it because the Pinkertons knew it. He wouldn't have any reason to be this exposed, especially during the Valentine encounter where he actually stood not too far away from his future assassin. I think it would have been better if he was never shown, like Nate Johns. If you don't remember who the latter is, he's basically candidate for government who promised to wipe out all the criminals in the area. While maybe not being the man pulling the strings behind everything, he probably had an important role towards Marston's story and eventual demise. I'm not saying John died because of him. I don't know very well how the BOI worked, but as far as I know, a governor can't order feds to kill targets. I mean, the BOI doesn't obey the governors, at least officially. It's also true that Ross and Johns were corrupted and shady, so maybe it's even possible that, to some extent, Ross did what Nate Johns asked him to do, but it's a conjecture, so don't be too sure about that. It's at least true that Nate and Ross had the same common objective: to destroy the wrecks of the former Van der Linde gang. Well, I would have liked something similar for Cornwall. Making him appear everywhere, in the oil refineries around the country, his name on the trains, in the newspapers, but never actually showing him. In my opinion, this would have given him a real feeling of untouchability and, most importantly, he would have made him get away with everything he's done, giving the grave and definitive confirm of Dutch's helplessness towards that industrialized world he hated. It would have still made Leviticus Cornwall being one of the main causes of the gang's downfall, but with the addition of being almost like an irremovable giant foot stepping on Dutch's already fragile ego and idealism, alongside everything else. Instead, he was defeated, and despite not changing so much the course of events, his death was a little undeserved winning for Dutch. RDR1 would have never let that happen, in my opinion. What do you think about it? Please let me know. Goodbye.